Mike used to bombard me back in the day with Dan Breslin. This guy, Dan Breslin, is killing it. Absolutely killing it. You got to check out the podcast. I checked out the podcast. This was like, I remember the first deal me and Mike went and looked at, man. Literally, we walked up to this house. It looks like it's falling down, right? And Mike's sitting here talking to him. I'm like, yo, how does Mike even know what to like say to these guys? And then we like kind of start walking into the basement and we just hear like a river of water. And Mike's like, no. We're not going down there. And then we walk back upstairs and I'm like, dude, what the fuck do we even offer to these people? Like, I don't even know what to do here.
$1.
Welcome back to What's the Good News, the best insider look into the most influential individuals in the real estate industry as a whole.
I'm your host, Michael Smith, and with me as always is Mr. Dominic Cardarelli. Together we have over 20 years of real estate experience, and we always love to share the good news. Today on the show, we have the man, the myth, the legend, Mr. Dan Breslin. He is the president and founder of Diamond Equity Investments, which happens to be one of the largest direct home buying companies in America, with offices in Atlanta, Philadelphia, and Chicago. Combined, he buys more than 300 houses per year. With that, what's the good news, Dan?
Hey, man, good to be here, guys. Really appreciate it.
I want to take you in a time machine, Dan, okay? You might not know this, but it's the year 2014, okay? And I have Mike over here, right? I just gotten into my first business venture. It was a coffee shop. This is interesting business venture, but Mike was harassing me every day for, I want to call it maybe 6 months. Dom, you got to check out this real estate stuff that I'm doing. Dom, you got to check out this real estate stuff that I'm doing. Okay. And then he introduced me to the REI Diamonds podcast, right? Which is your podcast. And for the first 90 days of me listening to that podcast, man, I just want to let you know that was like the first piece of really good, valuable real estate information that I received as a whole. So it is an absolute pleasure to have you on here today, man, because you had such an impact into my career over the last 8 years in real estate, man. Seriously.
Wow. I appreciate that, Dom. That's really cool to hear that. You know, I do that podcast as my own interest. And that's the motivator for doing the REI Diamond Show. You know, it's like, am I interested in this guest? Am I interested in the conversation? If the answer is no, like, I'm not going to book the guest. And we don't have an agenda. We have no coaching program, nothing like that going on with the podcast. And just like you, I mean, that podcast has been equally instrumental in my own development and the development of my own company, because I've been forced to have these prepared conversations where I prepare, dig into the guest, come up with the questions, figure out what we're going to talk about. And then we have this hour-long conversation live, unedited, unscripted, with people who, quite frankly, are probably difficult to get on the phone and have that kind of conversation with. So it's cool that you had that experience, and I know that I certainly can agree with that as well.
Yeah, you know, that's really kind of the reason why me and Mike started this. I mean, we have these conversations every day with people, right? And might as well just be able to provide the value to all these other people that are trying to get into the industry, because what we might take for granted now in our careers based on what we know, because education is very expensive, you know, that could be very helpful to a lot of guys that just don't know where to start. You know, Mike was telling me about this convoluted thing called wholesaling, and I'm like, what you just make a fee for just connecting buyers, and you don't need a real estate license? I was just so like intrigued but confused. And then, you know, through your podcast, man, it really just shed a lot of light on not only wholesaling, but just how to get into the industry, from buying holds, fixing flips, and just real estate as a whole, man. So once again, super appreciate that, man. And anyone that's listening here today should definitely check out your podcast, REI Diamonds. It's fantastic.
Nice.
So just to give everybody just an understanding of like where you're from and how you got, you know, to where you are now. I know that you grew up in Philadelphia, but can you talk to me a little bit about your previous education and, you know, what kind of got you into real estate?
Yeah. So, I mean, I got in real estate I read Rich Dad, Poor Dad. I remember my dad was not necessarily rich, but I actually did a lot of thinking about this over the last 2 years, that the inheritance that I got from my dad was like the hustle, right? I remember, like, embarrassing to say, like, oh, I wish I would have had like this wealthy parents that could have bequeathed me a fortune or something. And I think like leaving money is fine. What I would have thought was a lot of money, looking back in retrospect, wouldn't necessarily have been at the point where I'm at now in my career. And my dad taught me the hustle, right? He taught me how to pick up the phone and make an uncomfortable phone call. And he helped me get this little like storefront office back in 2006 in Drexel Hill on Garrett Road, that we did like a barter of a heater installation to get a year worth of free rent. He kind of like pushed me and got me started. I remember, like, when I was 8 or 9 years old, my dad had electrical contracting business. And I remember we were like, the whole family's in the basement and we've got envelopes and letters everywhere. And we're like stuffing envelopes, right? We're like stuffing on everyone on the show listening has probably, if they're in Philadelphia, Chicago, or Atlanta, you've probably gotten my letters saying that I want to buy your house more often than you care to, quite frankly. But I remember stuffing the letters as a kid, right? And so it was like more of this example that my dad set for me that was like a wonderful inheritance. And like, I'm still blessed to have my dad. He was down here in Florida with us for the last week hanging out, and it's like so cool to not have to like wait for your parents to maybe pass, if you're lucky enough to still have them, to like acknowledge the inheritance of their example. That I think every one of us would agree that our parents, or even those of us who are blessed enough to know or have our parents at all through our life, I would hope they would agree that, like, yeah, that was cool, man. I did get this like knowledge inheritance of their example. So I read Rich Dad, Poor Dad. My dad and I went to a conference where they were selling like a get rich in real estate kind of thing. This is 2006. They were everywhere. They were all shut down by 2008 when the market crashed. And I remember we went and it was a pitch, $1,000, and then you'll get to actually learn how to do the business. And I'm like, oh, I guess we're done with this. My dad's like, oh, we're going. He like pulls the credit card out. So we go to the weekend thing for $1,000, and that's really like, there was some knowledge there. I remember the guy puts on the overhead. I go, that's a piece of land for $10,000, and I sold it for $20,000. And here's the $10,000 check I got. He puts it on the overhead, and I'm like, oh my God, that's what I want to do. $10,000 just like that. That's amazing. That was a sales pitch for a $13,000 or $14,000 or $50,000 program, depending on how much credit card room you had as you went to the back of the room to be pitched. Oh, well, I guess we're done. We'll have to make it work from here. Pulled the credit card out again. I almost fell off my seat, and we did like a $13K, subsequent program. But those programs put me around. Russ Whitney was the educator's system, and they put me in contact with people from around the country who were like talking about and doing a lot of high level deals, wholesales, flips, rental properties, real estate development. And it like gave me this like very, I don't know, probably 30 years worth of like ideas and education in a few weekend seminars. And I've been able to like grow and build off of those seeds, like all the way along to even where I'm at now, where I'm like getting into some challenging deals of like subdivisions and things like that. Commercial properties, syndications, potentially, probably using my own cash on some of these deals. And I would have never got to this point if my dad didn't kind of pull the trigger on my behalf. So he had more faith in the business than I had in myself, or was even capable, because I didn't have any money there to get into business. 6 months later, did a deal, bought for $5,500, sold it for $11,500, $6,000, and then was lucky to kind of have a nice volume of deals from there. 08 to 11 was very sparse, and there were a handful of deals in there to keep the lights on. And then I quit. I picked up the Bible in 2011. And I was able to like quit drinking and drugs in 2012. So I had like clean time in 2006, gave that up in 2008. And then January 21st, 2012, I quit drinking and doing any kind of drugs, like 100%, God willing, right? It's been 11 years plus as we're here in 2023. And really that's made the biggest difference, because I have been able to like invest a lot more time compounding my business when I think a lot of other people would sit down at a certain time of day and relax on a Friday night. And then you're probably not as effective on a Saturday morning, right? Not even that you had to go tie one on, but even a 2 or 3 drink kind of a culture. I don't know. I mean, I wouldn't have certainly been able to do it. Maybe some other people can build a successful business. I prefer to invest every moment that I have available, either with my, family or into my business. Like, I want some kind of return on my time for the long haul.
For sure. I completely agree with you. I mean, most of my best ideas come at like 1:00 in the morning,
Yeah.
It's just really odd because I'll just be sitting there like, oh, I need to figure that out. And usually like the idea then spirals out of, you start getting on Google and you start looking up what, you kind of piece together your idea, and then, that helps you also execute it. So I can completely agree. Being of sound mind, and when those ideas come to you at that time, like, you have to be ready to capitalize on them, because otherwise, you'll wait till tomorrow. But when tomorrow happens, we all know, like, it's go, go, go. You have problems to solve, you have people to call. So all those things you lose, you lose out on those effective ideas. I completely agree with you.
Yeah, man.
Dan, you had said that your first deal that you did, you made a $6,000 wholesale fee on that, right?
Yep.
So what did that deal look like? How did you get it under contract? How did you find the lead? Can you walk us through that process?
Yeah, I remember I had like $100 left. We had the office. I'd go sit in the office and I'm like calling for rent signs, people in the newspaper who had houses for rent, like trying to see if there was like someone willing to sell on the other end. I was taking action, right? And that was what led me to like the ring meetings, and like a big network was one of those landlords invited me out. Hey, no, this isn't going to work on this rental house that I have here, but you should come out to this networking group. And he plugged me in and introduced me around to a lot of people. He and I are still partners to this day. That first deal came from a newspaper ad that cost me about $79. At the time, I was still smoking, so I was like, I could buy like 2 packs of cigarettes and like 2 or 3 monsters after the ad was placed. Like, all right, 7-day ad, day 6. 2 or 3 leads came in that week. So the cost per lead was really low out of the newspaper when it worked. And the lead was in Sun Village, Chester. And I didn't know how much to offer. I think we went and looked at it. My dad drove me down there and everything. We like kind of doing this together. He's like a blue collar guy. My dad's not like, this wealthy guy or anything like that. So we drove down 2006, and I had access to RealQuest, which was kind of like an MLS public record database that was really expensive at the time in 2006. And I remember seeing one of the guys from that networking group that I'd mentioned bought a house around the corner on Remington Street for $6,000. I had no way to do the comps or figure out what. So I was like, well, I'll offer $5,500 and I'll sell it to him for a $500 fee. And that's probably the fastest $500 I ever made in my life. So they take the offer. We went to Office Max and bought a fill in the blank agreement of sale from Office Max on the way. And I remember like filling out the contract. The first time I ever did it was like at this dining room table, the seller in Sun Village for $5,500. So we fill that all out. My daughter is like with us because she was with me for the summer. She's like 4. She's playing with the granddaughter in the house there. So I get it under contract. And then I'm like, all right, now what? So I order title. I start trying to like find money. I'm like, all right, I guess we'll fix it up. I always wanted to just fix up houses and flip them, right? That was what I wanted to do. I wanted to be a flipper. I wanted to fix houses. I always thought I had to save all the money to do that first. And that was the barrier to entry. But the real barrier was finding the right deal. And I think a lot of people who are new are going to get stuck on that. They're going to think they've got to save the 80, 90, 100 grand in cash before they can go fix and flip the deal. But the harder thing is figuring out how to get a profitable deal under contract. And like that insight has led to my entire career, which is like, I'm going to be the source of deals. Like I'm going to have more JV partners across the country in single family house flips, commercial properties, land. Like I don't care what it is. I want my like JV share of the deal, and I'm going to like find more deals than anyone else out there because I didn't have the money. So I had to like bring the deals to the table. That was like my insight. So I call the guy on Remington Street. Hey, I got this deal, such and such on Terrell Avenue. Can you buy this off me for $6,000? And he's like, dude, that house on Remington Street, it's called Remington Street because there's like chalk lines on the bodies of my front step when I go to collect the rent. There's like bullet shells. The Remington shells are all over the ground there. That's why it's called Remington Street. I'll sell you that one for $6,000. And I'm like hanging the phone up. He's like, you're never going to move. And I'm like, oh God. And the only mistake I made was not signing him up for $6,000, right? Because I ended up putting an ad on Craigslist, selling the other one for $11,500, and then about 6 or 8 months later, that guy sold his house for about $11 or $13,000 to the same buyer. So, like, had I only known, I should have had a 2-for-1 right then and there, but I just didn't really have the creativity to kind of get that done. So that was interesting.
Yeah, one thing you said was very important. I think if you have the deal, if you focus on finding an equitable deal, money will find you.
Yeah.
Right. That's the,
I don't know if the money will find you. You're still going to have to go out and call people and ask for it and like take a bunch of action to help find the money. But yeah, a real legitimate deal will attract the right partner to get that deal to the closing. And if that partner, like, I don't prefer to even think of a wholesale deal. Like, if you're buying a deal from me and you're going to like pay me an assignment fee, that's my partnership fee. You're buying me out of this deal and you're going to like pay my partnership share up front. And that's kind of how I think about it. Right. So like, I'm not assigning it to a buyer. I'm like bringing in someone who would essentially be like my stand-in partner. And instead of me waiting until the end of the fix and flip, or instead of me being your partner in a rental for 30 years, you're opting to buy me out of that partnership on day one.
That's a great way to look at that.
Yeah, that's a great way to look at that, dude.
I've never heard anybody kind of classify wholesaling in that regards. And I love the way that you just put that. You're buying me out now so you can see all of the upside potential at the end. That's fantastic. Dan, what would you say to, there's so many courses out there. There's so many people out there that talk about wholesaling. Oh, you can make $100,000 fees, this, that, the other. What would you say to the guy that's looking to get started, sees that wholesaling is a good avenue? How would you suggest to that person that they find their first deal, get that lead, and then more importantly, source a buyer after they get it under contract?
I don't really know the great answer to that because the market has moved so much. So if it was from my own experience, it's like put a newspaper ad out. Who the fuck reads the newspaper? Right? So it's like anything I would say would just be these like opinions, which may not be based in fact. But I had a guy call me. He's like a nurse. I'm not going to mention his name on here. He's a nurse, and he went into Facebook groups and started posting like, hey, I'm a buyer, da, 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 da. And he did this deal out in like middle of Michigan somewhere. The lady called him up. So he paid nothing for the lead. He had his time in, and he's like managing Facebook comments. He's liking, he's got the whole Facebook strategy set up, and he gets a lead in. I don't know how much you could rinse and repeat that strategy because there's like a little bit of luck that's involved. But he got that property under contract for whatever it was, like 90, 100K. And then he went to work, same kind of strategy, posting in other Facebook groups for investors in the same area. I think he might have did some skip tracing on some like cash buyers in the area or something like that and called some of them. The guy was like, yeah, I'll give you like 105. He renegotiated his buyer and he made like a $51,000 assignment fee or double closing fee, whatever it was, on that deal. I think he got lucky, and I've had a lot of deals go off the rails with similar circumstances, and I've had a lot of deals stay on the rails and go to closing in that situation. But that was a great example of a deal that was done in the 2022 era, using tools that didn't exist in 2006. Like Facebook wasn't even, it was just getting started, right?
Exactly. The new technology has definitely made it the barrier to entry a lot, easier, through, via texting. I mean, mail's always going to be, the king, but texting, cold calling, Facebook. I mean, I spoke to a guy like 3 weeks ago where he literally found the deal in one Facebook group and went to another Facebook group in that same market and sold it the same day. It's just like,
that's great.
It's crazy.
Yeah.
So in your business now, I mean, you're operating in 3 markets. I know that you've been in and out of a few different ones. What would you say are some of the biggest challenges with managing not only your staff, your overhead, and your markets? I mean, do you have any big challenges right now that you're facing on a daily basis?
I mean, I don't know if they're really big challenges. For me, I am obligated to my team to create large opportunities. Like I have this machine built that I have to show up and continue to run. And I'm like a very active manager in that sense of the business. So for me, it's not really a challenge, but it's more of like, am I doing my part and am I being a good business partner to everybody that's on my team? And that's like really what wakes me up and drives me every day. I could probably sell everything and ride off into the sunset probably a year or two back. And I don't do it for the money, right? So I'm like, I'm literally doing this because there's people on my team who like, one of my act managers bought himself a 4 flat. That's really cool. His dad lives in 1 unit and he's got this asset that if it doesn't even go up in value, the rents, and he's living in one, and it's going to like pay off this $700,000 or $800,000 asset. And he has like an asset that's probably enough for him to have his retirement. And the guy's like 29 years old, 30 years old, maybe. Right. And I find that to be like really fulfilling when I see guys on my team, like getting their own house that they're going to live in, you know, getting decent cars, paying their taxes, at a too high of a tax bracket than they might have had to do otherwise. And for me, that's really what like drives me, is just trying to create a really big opportunity for the people on my team. And the team is probably 40 or 50 people large now.
Much respected, man, for sure.
Yeah, definitely.
So I know you're a landlord as well, or at least you have been. We always like to talk about crazy landlord stories because it's not all, you know, puppies and rainbows with real estate. So do you have any crazy landlord stories that you could share?
It's not a landlord story. We did a real creative deal, right? And this is where I like probably a cautionary tale against too much creativity in the deal. I think there's a lot more risk there of your reputation and your ability to stand by your word. And I think someone who doesn't have a lot of money and resources is trying to take a marginal deal that is probably better off to pass on, like subject to deals. You're going to pay someone's mortgage and they're going to give you the deed, and then you're going to do whatever you're supposed to do with it, run it as a rental or flip it or whatever else. Usually you're doing that because it's not a quality enough deal to just like sell it as is to some other partner, you know, wholesale the deal, make your money and move on. It's clean. I prefer like very clean deals that are going to go to settlement with title insurance like right away. And then everyone is kind of walking away. That's why I love flipping houses so much, is because there's like a start, the business runs of flipping the house, and then there's a finish, and we can like wash our hands of the deal. So I get involved on this deal, and she owes too much, 110 grand. We really needed it for like 60, 65. We're like, it's clean. It's a little big. Maybe we'll do like a 20K cleanup rehab. We'll pay her a mortgage, and then we'll sell it for like 185, and we'll make like 30, 40 grand for doing so. So we like do all that. COVID hits and a squatter moves into that property. And we were stuck with that squatter for like 18 months. So the size of the loss on that property still has yet to be determined because we still own it, like as we speak. And we've had to go through and rehab the whole thing. And it's been a little bit of a thorn. You know, the squatter situation in the city of Chicago or city of Philadelphia can be like very, very difficult to handle. Rather than a landlord crazy story, maybe the lesson there is anybody who's flipping a house, including myself, and I have one I just renovated, is like make sure that we're using the alarm systems and things of that nature to protect our investment once that thing goes vacant. So that was a terrible situation. I'm still in the middle of.
Yeah, Philadelphia
Yeah,
is definitely not the place to be for squatters, at least during COVID. I can imagine Chicago being the same.
For sure. Dan, what would you say to someone that's going through a similar situation like that right now? Let's say it's one of their first deals. They kind of got in over their head. You know, it's not going according to plan. What would you say to that person to help them kind of keep the ship pointed in the right direction and keep things moving forward?
We're going to take a really big loss to make that lady whole. And I don't think everyone's in a position to take a really big loss, and they're going to walk away, and their name or their situation is just going to leave them spoiled in some way. That seller might take them to court. That seller might call the fucking 6 o'clock news and like make an expose. Like, I know people who that's happened to. And it took them a while to clean it up. And when they turned around the ship 2 years later, they end up making payments to people to make them whole on deals that they don't own anymore. And they're trying to just like clean their name up with that seller. For us, we're in a position to do that right now. And we're going to do that. And we're going to make the mortgage get paid off. And we're going to, at this point, we're probably $130,000 in cash for the rehab and the holding costs and everything. And we're probably going to get a check for like 70 grand or 80 grand when we sell it. So it's like, it's a loss, but we're not having to like pay out the loss. But if you have specifically like a squatter situation that you're in the middle of now, I like the cash for keys conversation with squatters and bad tenants, but you kind of have to think through that process and do it really methodically. The occupant, if it's a squatter, like we have squatters who pull guns on us and like there's no hope there. We'll just sell it with the friggin' squatter in it and take a hit on the chin. Or we'll go through the process of getting them out with a qualified attorney who knows the eviction process. And we're just like waiting it out to get access to the property. That's what we did there. We did end up before the trial started because it was going to be another like 6 months or something crazy. So we ended up paying them, I think, 5 or 6 grand, maybe even 10 to get out of that property. They were professional deadbeat tenants who like go and prey on situations like this. But the cash for keys conversation with a tenant is normally going to go something like, hey, it's better if you're not the owner in a sense. So it's like, hey, you know, I'm here on behalf of like kind of the big company. These guys have like attorneys and it's kind of like a corporate thing. I'm here to like help you find a way to move on to the next chapter. Like, that's why I'm here today. Like, I'm on your side. I'm your friend, and I'm trying to figure out how you and I can like navigate a solution where you move out to the next place, to your family, to whoever it is, before the company wants to file the eviction. Because if they file the eviction, I don't know if you know this, Mr. Tenant, but if the eviction is even filed, that's on your record, and it makes it very difficult for you to rent anywhere again 3, 4, 5 years later. That's still going to show up in public record that they filed against your name, and it's not going to be easy to rent in any kind of a, you know, nice situation where you're trying to go. So literally, like, the deadline is, we don't want them filing the paperwork. It's not like they file the paperwork and then once the eviction takes place and the sheriff comes in a month or so and moves you out. It's not like, oh, when the move out happens, it's on your record. It's on your record. If I go back to the office today and I'm like, hey, Mr. Tenant doesn't want to get out of the property, my hands are going to be tied at that point, Mr. Tenant. And they're going to file the eviction, and then that's kind of setting things in motion. So what is it going to take to find a solution right now? Where can you go? Do you have it? It's 22nd of February. Do you have anywhere you can go by March 1st? Did you already, like, do we need to like find another apartment? How much income are you making? How much money do you have saved? Oh, I got none of that. Well, can you go down to like the Red Roof Inn? They're going to have to spend probably $500, $600, $700 on the eviction. I might be able to like work something out where we give it to the Red Roof and you just go head down there for a week or two until you figure out the next steps. Or I could just, if you're out and you go to like your cousin Fred's house, I might be able to even have the company send over like a pickup truck to help, you know, take your bed or whatever other couple items you want to move out of here. I might be able to get them to give you the $400 or $500 that we're going to give to the eviction attorney if you can get out of here by March 1st. Because if you go in, you're like, I'll give you $3,000 to get out. Like, dude, you're like putting yourself in this huge weak position with the tenant, and they think they can get 5, they think they can get 10, right? They feel like you have something, they have something of value, and they have all the power. So like, I'm not usually trying to offer the money up front. I'm trying to offer services and help them with the next steps. A lot of the times, a squatter or like a tenant's been there for 10 years. They don't even know where to start to look. They don't even know what Craigslist is. Like, they know, but they didn't know they could look for apartments on there, or like how to go in and have a conversation with the landlord. Sometimes it's a matter of helping them with the relocation. Sometimes it's a matter of paying the first, last, and security to the new landlord, not to the tenant. Sometimes it's a matter of the moving truck coming. Sometimes it's a matter of 2 weeks at the red roof and the moving truck, getting them out of there, changing the locks. So it's like a level of creativity in the cash for keys process, I think, is a big part of solving that situation.
That's great advice. I mean, it really is. And let's be honest, one of the most challenging parts to any landlord situation is when you're dealing with just a tenant situation that's gone south. And I think the thing that resonated the most with me that you said there is just removing yourself entirely and having a third party that works for the company, that's there on behalf of them, trying to find a solution that works for them. I think that is the thing that's probably, because it takes all the onus off of you being the landlord in that situation, right? You're there as an unbiased party. Your only job is to try and come up with an amicable solution and, not offering cash up front. I think that's probably one of the things that most people do wrong right from the start. Oh, I'll give you $3,000 to get out, first, last, and security. And then, now we're talking about, 3Gs, which is going to probably go up to 5 to 10, just like you said. And now it's not talking about providing a solution. It's simply about around a monetary amount. So I think that was the great advice that you just gave there, Dan.
Sure enough, man. Because you're in different markets and, this might actually help me as well. I mean, what did you do to scale your business? Because you originally started in Philadelphia and then it was like a firestorm. You just took over other markets. Well, I'll let you say, but how did you go about scaling and, creating that infrastructure?
It happened by accident. I remember I lived in Philly and we were like getting some good deal flow cooking in Philly, and the business was kind of like getting some momentum again. And my daughter moved away to Chicago with her mom when maybe 2004, 2005. So it was always like this kind of like dream, sort of like I wanted to move to Chicago so that I could be near her. And I actually tried in 2011 and had to like tuck tail and crawl back because I couldn't kind of like get things started. So in 2014 or so, I kind of declared that I was going to do that. I was going to move to Chicago. And that forced me to kind of take my hands off the reins of the business in Philly and then let that maybe run. And at the same time, I was trying to start what I had going in Philly and Chicago so that, worst case, hopefully I would figure out the Chicago thing and we would make the business doing the same thing I was doing in Philly there, even if the Philly thing kind of like petered off and died off. And that didn't happen. Both of them kind of grew like simultaneously. And then doing the podcast, someone reached out to me on the podcast and he was like moving to Atlanta, or he did move to Atlanta. And this guy was like a real value add guy. So like, I remember he like called me up, can I make like some connections or how can I help? He was like trying to bring stuff of value to the table at the time with the way that he was reaching out. And he moved to Atlanta. He calls, he's like, hey, I'm just going to like send you my whole buyers list. These people in Chicago, they just want to buy some properties. So like, I don't know, I can't help them. Maybe you can. So like, here's my buyers list. And I thought, oh, that was cool. It's like a real, no expectation of something in return. And I think that was kind of like part of the key. Like he wasn't like strategically doing this. And I knew I wanted to be in the Atlanta market because I had heard that the market was favorable for what we're doing and people were moving there and the prices were still low. So I called him. I'm like, hey, when you come to Chicago again? It's like, I don't know. I'm going to be there like at some point. Like, all right, let's like have lunch when you do. And then we like had lunch. He like brought his dad, who was a contractor, still trying to add value. Like, hey, maybe this guy can like work on your rental properties or whatever. And it was kind of like, we kind of like pushed off dad and his girlfriend and like had our own conversation, he and I. And that was how we like formulated that we were going to do the business in Atlanta. I kind of had a couple similar setups like in Florida. We did Miami, we did Tampa. They were a little too competitive and we never really got the momentum there. But the momentum stayed in Atlanta, Chicago, and Philly. And that was kind of like how each of those markets built up. I don't know if I would build the same, let me go to these like cities and figure out the business. I would probably, knowing what I know now, maybe just focusing on like much larger deals would probably be what I would do rather than like going, like, I don't want to go to like Houston, Texas and Detroit and like 52 other markets. Like at a point, because I'm such an active manager, like my time is kind of spread really thin. So that was how we got to scale.
I know in Philadelphia, for instance, right, things have kind of slowed a little bit. The spreads are anywhere between, let's call it 5 to 20 grand consistently. Maybe looking to, factor into new asset classes, get bigger fees, kind of like what you talked about. Kind of start, expanding your buyers list. Let's say that you see a market that's really hot right now that you're hearing a lot of good things about, and you have people in there that are consistently asking you for deals in that specific market. So you can almost reverse engineer some things in that degree, right? Would you say that those are good reasons to start branching into newer markets, or should you just kind of stick to what you know and just keep scaling within the market that you're already working in?
Over time, a lot of the deals that we do are going to happen from people that I've been mailing to for 5 years now. Like some of our best deals, right? So it's like, do I have that much excess budget where I should try to sprinkle, a small handful of salt on a hockey rink worth of ice? I might melt a little bit of that ice, right? Or should I like bring in a dump truck and pour it on the one that I'm already in, So it's kind of like, I think for me too, even going to too many markets and then circling back and like winding down to the ones that I'm in, sort of spread too thin with the marketing budget and never really had this like brand power that you could develop otherwise if you stay focused. That said, I went to Atlanta because of, I forget the guy's name that was on my podcast. It was on trend following. So we read a book on trend following, and basically the essence of trend following is like you're buying a stock as it's starting to hit momentum, and it's already overpriced, but the momentum of it has it continuing to go up. So a lot of people are afraid to buy at too high of a price. And the whole thesis of Atlanta was like, oh, these prices are already way too high. But the fact is people were still moving there, and the dynamics that made the price move to that certain point made it continue to want to move, right? So even though we thought that market was like very hot and saturated when we went there, because people were buying stuff for 40 grand and now it was worth 80 and 100, it's like, oh man, it already moved. It's like way too high up. Those properties are now worth like 250, 300,000, like as we speak. I don't think they're actually going to come down based on the population growth that was there. So the point of maybe going to a better market for that reason probably does make sense. But I think it's like market consideration for those reasons, and also having somebody there that maybe is like a superior operating partner that I want to be in business with. And I'm almost wanting to be in business with them regardless of whether the market conditions were right. So I wouldn't have just went to Atlanta and fired off a cold email to 10 people saying, hey, you want to do the business? It was like this kid, and he was like 23 or something. He's really young at the time. This kid is exhibiting something to me that I want to be in business with that guy. And it was almost like a divine thing. I remember like praying on it and like getting it back in my heart. Like we were supposed to do this, right? So it's like to take it another level up. If God tells you to go into another market the way I feel like I was told to go to Chicago, and I obeyed, and I had to like step out on faith and leave everything I was comfortable with, like that was an instruction from God, from the universe to go there. And I feel like I had that same divine hand when we were talking about Atlanta, and like the results that we got in Atlanta, God showed up for us in a capacity there. Like the universe wanted us to do that. And I think we probably made some other moves where we backed off, where maybe it was like my idea all alone, and I was just trying to do it for maybe the money and the spreads and all that kind of thing. But maybe that wasn't really aligned with what I was supposed to be doing with like for my purpose in the universe long term, Yeah.
In your business today, Dan, right? Over the next, let's call it, I guess, 3 to 5 years, right? You're doing about 300 transactions a year right now. Where do you see that growing, and how do you see yourself kind of just, I guess, overall growing your business as a whole with everything that you have going on? Where do you ultimately want to take this thing to?
I don't have an ultimately where I want to take it to. I want to buy industrial properties that have larger tenants and larger income coming in, for a nice, stable, large, and scaled portfolio over the long haul. I like cities with like a high amount of railroads. So Chicago being one of them, Kansas City being one of them, where logistic conforms. So there's like 2 mile long trains that come in from Los Angeles to Chicago. It's like 2 miles worth of freight is offloaded into warehouses. And these trains are coming like 500 a day, I think, Things like 500 freight trains or something like that per day will come through Chicago. The long-term demand for an asset class like that's just got to be there. I haven't bought the first one yet. I'm negotiating on a few, but I like the progression toward just larger deals. I remember buying these houses in Philly and paying like $55,000 for them and then selling them for $100,000, not doing much to them over 3 or 4 years. Got really lucky that the market moved. And I even have a bunch of Point Breeze houses where, you know, there's probably nice equity positions sitting there. But there was this like deal that I bought that I talk about on my podcast. Just a 10-unit building. 2 of the units were illegal when I bought it. The building department came in, shut those units down. I rezoned the property to get it legally zoned for 10 units and then rebuilt the units to code. And then I did some renovations through the other units. So I bought it for like $665, maybe $670. Put about $250 to $300 in it now. Put central air conditioning in all the units. Did all that over like a 3-year period. Increased the rents. And then I had it appraised at like $1.35 million. Like, man, that was like a $400,000 paper profit. And I refinanced and took a little of the cash out. But that was like the first deal with any sort of scale that I did that made me want to do the deals with like larger scale over time. Yeah. So it's just the bigger deals. I don't know, more complexity. I want to like learn stuff. I want to be involved in, for whatever reason, complicated zoning and approval issues and developing raw land and titling lots and just kind of doing like the stuff you heard about these like big shot real estate investors do when you first get in. Yeah, I want to do that. Like, I want to do that.
Yeah. I mean, pioneers get paid. So, you know, that's really where the money is. If you could figure out something that is just so convoluted and complex, those are probably where your largest spreads are going to happen. Would you say that as a byproduct of doing those larger deals, your volume as a whole is going to go down?
I mean, we're going to keep that going. We're trading on our brand name at this point. So like, you know, we're running TV commercials and people know our name. And like people have been bringing us these deals for years already. We're like, yeah, we just don't want a 39 unit building near Temple. We don't know what to do with it. We don't know how to underwrite it. Guy wants too much money for it. We don't know what to do with this weird 5-acre lot in the middle of this area where they're building $4 million houses. And those are the deals that we're working on. We're revisiting them now, right? So it's like they've been coming through there already. And I think that we will continue. I know we will continue to like be the fast and convenient sale for people who are trying to sell any piece of real estate. Like, it's my obligation as a market maker in the United States. Diamond Equity will make an offer on your piece of real estate, no matter what it is. We have an obligation to do that. Some of it will actually be worthless and we can't make the offer. Some of it we're going to make offers that can't be accepted because they've already over levered the property. Some of it we're having to evaluate the risk and come up with the offer that works for us considering that asset. Now, if that's a 28,000 square foot retail strip center in Detroit, Michigan, hey, we'll take a look at it. If we get it for the number, we're going to figure out what to do with it, whether that's us syndicating the money and taking that down and stabilizing it or bringing in a partner to do that. That's what we're going to do. So for us, it's not a leaving of one thing and then picking up of another. It's not this like transformation to the other thing. It's just that we're adding in our ability to make offers on a more complex set of circumstances that comes with commercial real estate, vacant land, or industrial property.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing that you said too is that no matter what the deal is, you're making the offer. And I feel like that's where a lot of guys on the acquisition side of things, they kind of drop the ball. Even if you're $100,000 apart in price, $1 million apart in price, send the offer. Just send it. Make the offer, because time is the biggest factor that's going to change things. They might not want to accept that today, but if you consistently follow up and you've made that offer and you put it in writing, they might call you back.
Yeah, a lot of people are asking, egregious prices. Like, quite frankly, I'm offended by a lot of the asking prices that are presented for us to make an offer on. So no worries if they're offended on the opposite side of the table and I have to make
Yeah.
my offer, right? Somewhere in the middle is the real price. Market value is determined as the price at which a buyer is willing to buy and a seller is willing to sell. That's the definition of the market price, right? And there's probably bigger markets for certain pieces of property where many buyers are willing to pay a certain price and you get a certain number. But the market price oftentimes is not what the seller is asking initially. But a lot of people are going to be scared off by that initial and do that same. They're doing a disservice to that seller. The seller, in a lot of these instances, is not this professionally trained negotiator. They're like just trying to maximize their asset. That's okay. But I still owe that seller the offer so they know where they stand. Even if theirs was like unreasonable expectations, it's still the right thing to do for me to find a way to communicate that offer to that seller, even if it's a disappointment for them, in a way that makes them recognize that, like, hey, this is the reality of what the property's worth. So that, to your point, 6 months, 8 months, a year later, a lot of times that is really what it's worth, is what we were offering. And sometimes it's going to take them that long to put the rest of the pieces together to come to the reality of what that building property will trade for.
Yeah, I mean, I know today, just speaking with sellers every day, you saw what happened over the last 18 months. Fed rates were pretty much at 0%, right? Market was going through the roof. And sellers and, most people as whole, they've come accustomed to what's happened over the last year and a half, and they think that the market's going to continue to go up. And it's been somewhat difficult to have these educational moments with a lot of these sellers, just telling them that what just happened is not the norm to the industry, and that what's going to happen over the next, let's call it 6 months to 12 months, is going to be a softening. And, that prices they don't just keep going up. There's moments of consolidation that happen to where prices stabilize and, these shifts happen. What do you think is one of the best ways to kind of convey a super unrealistic asking price from a seller with your offer? Let's say you're 50% in part in terms of where they are and where you are. How do you suggest bridging that gap to ultimately come to not offending them and potentially putting a deal together that makes sense?
Well, they might get offended, and that's okay, because I'm offended that they had the nerve to ask for that price in the first place. I send them to housingcrash2006.com. So it took like 8 years. It took from 2006 to 2012. So it was 6 years to the bottom. And then it was another 6 years to come back up. So any seller who's willing to hold for the next 12 years, you'll be fine. If we're looking at what the prices did on the last go around, maybe it doesn't last as long. Maybe it goes down for 2 years and then comes back up for 2 years after that. Or maybe it's down for 2 years and then it takes like 6 years to come back up to where it was in 2022. So if you're going to hold the property for 10 years, fine. Like, I get it. You can hang tight, no problem. But if you're thinking of selling anytime next 1 to 3 years, you'll be kicking yourself a year from now if you don't sell at today's current, still fucking absolutely record prices.
Yes, that's great. I haven't checked out that website, but I definitely will. That's a good piece of information right there.
Yeah. So shifting gears just a little bit, if you didn't do real estate, what would you be doing? What other passions do you spend your time on or wish you could?
I don't know about that, but I do like cultivate bonsai trees.
Okay.
So I have a couple of bonsai trees, and the lessons that I've learned from growing those bonsai trees, because they're not like fruit. I'm not like growing fruit that I'm going to eat. There's like a reason to grow herbs that I'm going to like sprinkle on my food. There's like a function there, right? And so for me, it's more of this like art to keep this bonsai tree. It's going to do nothing but just be a piece of art, and like keep it alive and like figure out how to like make sure to manage and pay attention to it and be consistent. And like that thing will die quickly. If it's not watered, like within the next hour, I'm going to have to water the ones I brought with me to Florida from Chicago. And the lessons of like learning to manage the life of those trees that like don't really give off many signals, but it's been helpful to like also as a metaphor for managing a business, right? To be able to like pay close enough attention to that to figure out what needs to be like pruned off, cut off, watered, fertilized, removed. Some of them are dead and it has to go. So that's like one thing. Another thing that I guess I had spent a lot of time, well, not a lot of time on, but wrote a couple songs, had some like really cool experiences like with developing like hip hop artists. So I have a song with Jazzo and Wild Style. You guys probably too young to remember who Wild Style is from Crucial Conflict.
No, I know that is.
Yeah.
Okay, all right. And you know who Jazz is, right?
Yeah, man. You talking about Jazzo, the person who got introduced Jay-Z?
That's right. Yeah. So Jazz, our video, I think on, it's called Forever High, and we got like 4 or 5 million views or something like that on that one. And then the artist, Heartbreak Rebel, he got murdered. So he was like my artist in Chicago that was producing all the tracks with him and everything. And he ended up getting shot, which happens to too many of them out there. I think we did PNB Rock show. So it's like all this hip hop music industry stuff. So that's like probably one of the other industries that I don't know if there's like money there. I think a lot of it is not real.
Yeah. Have you had an experience with business partners in the past that kind of leads to your belief of just wanting to do it yourself? Business partnerships, they all sound great until things kind of go left. And then you really find out why the dynamic of that sometimes is challenging. Me and Mike both have ample amount of experience in that. I'm sure you do as well. Do you have a certain situation that has kind of led you to just individually investing right now, or?
My dad was flipping houses and keeping some, or they kept them all. And there was like 4 partners on like the 4 houses they bought together. And they went off the rails, and one of the guys took it all over. And then when I was growing up, it was like all the aggravation that mom and dad were fighting about for the next like 8 years. It was the partnership that broke up. So that's probably the root of it. And single family houses are just too small. There's no money there. Like $300, $400 a month, $500 a month coming in to like have to split that up. Who's doing the taxes? It's exciting in year 1. Maybe in year 2, you're still talking to the person, but like the 5th year later that you're like partners, you probably don't even keep in touch with that person unless you guys like went on to develop 100 of them or something like that. And I've seen like a lot of people who have built up portfolios like that usually have this like unwinding down period as well. I think they're just too small of opportunities to be effective for all the parties that are involved. And one party or the other is going to have to take too far of an active management role, oftentimes, where it just doesn't make sense. So I think as I talk it all through, it's probably making more sense when the scale starts to get maybe even into that 5 million range, because then it's like you did all this work and you're selling this deal and there's $1.5 million payday and you're paying off investors, $500,000-$700,000, and there's like $700,000 give or take to whack up, let's say, between 2 or 3 partners. So a couple $100,000 is sort of worth everyone staying engaged, I would hope, for the duration of that, say 5-year partnership. I don't know. Maybe even those numbers are too small at that point.
Yeah, that makes sense. So, you spoke about your dad originally. You went to that real estate conference, swiping the credit card, right? Taking the classes. Other than that experience that you went through, who would you say, and what materials have you read that have been the most influential to yourself in your real estate career?
So reading the Bible has been the most impactful business book, specifically the book of Proverbs. So I read a book, and the guy was from Pennsylvania somewhere who wrote the book, and I can't remember the book or the guy right now, but in essence, he had this mentor of his, and they would do television infomercials or something. So this like mentor was already worth, say, $10 million. And the guy writing the book, mentor told him, you read the book of Proverbs 1 chapter every day. So if it's like February 22nd, you pick it up, you read chapter 22, Proverbs 22. And then tomorrow you read chapter 23 and so on. And if you get to February 28th, there's 3 days left. You have to do 29, 30, and 31 on the 28th. And then on March 1st, you start with chapter 1. And you do that over and over every month. And he said you do this with a book so that when you see things in there you didn't see the first time you read Proverbs chapter 1, you like write down your takeaways, your revelation on how this is like applicable to your life, to business, how things work in the universe. And at the end of 5 years, you'll be a millionaire if you do that. And I wasn't consistent. I did it for maybe 3 years, on and off. I'm sure I missed months, if not, not years at a time, but certainly months at a time. And I think I was a millionaire within 3 or 4 years. And the guy that was writing the book, he was a millionaire within 1 or 2 years of that. And I thought, wow, that was a pretty cool way to do that. And I ended up reading the rest of the Bible cover to cover, maybe 2 or 3 times around that 2011 to 2014 time. And it gave me this like foundation. It was just this like obsessive knowledge of God experience for me to do that. And, yeah, the book of Proverbs was definitely like the starting point, because I think that is an easy place to take a bite out of something that if you start at the wrong area of the Bible and you're doing that in a vacuum, or you're doing that with someone who doesn't really have like the verbal portion that's been passed down through history. So like rabbis in the Jewish religion literally have an oral Torah, the Old Testament. They literally pass this down, this conversation from rabbi to rabbi to rabbi, going back thousands of years. They've like handed down the explanations that go along with the Bible. And so if you try to do that in a vacuum without somebody there as a spiritual guide, it doesn't necessarily have to be a rabbi, but somebody who has some knowledge behind the stuff that's in the Bible, it can be like confusing and tough to kind of like really implement into life, and you probably wouldn't want to continue on with it.
But Dan, we wanted to thank you for stopping on today. Before we end, is there any upcoming projects, anything with your company, anything at all that you want to reference or let the listeners know about what you're working on?
Not in particular. If anyone's looking for deals and they want to check out what we have available in Chicago, Atlanta, Philadelphia area, you could go to dealswithroi.com. And there's a variety of states you'll find at the bottom and along the top there to kind of access the local inventory market. And then maybe check out the podcast, reidiamonds.com. You can see the 210 episode archive. I've been ramping up and having some cool guests coming on lately, and I have quite a few that are going to be in the commercial real estate space, operators, things of that nature coming down the pike, as our company has started to transition into the scaled up deals ourselves. So the topic and discussion is sure to evolve as well.
Dan, I want to thank you personally. You've been a inspiration and influential to me. And I'm sure that anybody else listening and if they go to your podcast, they'll experience the same. So with all due respect, man, I appreciate your time. And if there's anything I can do for you, please let me know.
For sure, Mike. Same goes for me. It's cool to see you guys putting the platform together and, getting the knowledge captured here with where you guys are at with things and being able to spread that out to the audience. So let's do it, man. Let's keep doing some deals and we'll catch you on the other side, huh?
Absolutely. No, as always, man. Yes, we're just sharing the good news. Just sharing the good news as always.